Okay, just heading back from the shop. Just had to pick up some dog food for Nelson. So I thought I might do a topic on bad owners in Japan. So when I say bad owners, I'm talking about people who just abandon their houses or abandon their land, don't maintain it, and they fall into a number of categories. The most common is the one who inherits a place, and they might inherit a house from a relative who's died, and it might come with farmland, things like this, and they just don't want it, and they don't have the financial means to maintain these places. This is the most common of all of them. The next one is the foreigner. The foreigner who buys a place out in the countryside because he's seen some videos on the internet and he's bought a cheap house somewhere, and they don't have sort of a pathway to permanent residency, but they've just made this impulse purchase, usually off the internet and usually with no information at all, and they buy these properties and they fall in love with them. They like living there for a time. They may or may not have to leave the country if they have a job or not, and it wears off on them. And I've said this many times, and this is 80% of the foreigners who buy in rural areas, and they just slide out the airport one day and can't be found. So what happens is the people in these areas who have adjoining blocks of land that are unmaintained, overgrown, and a pain in the neck is they can't track the owners. So in the case of a Japanese owner, they have very, very strict privacy laws in Japan. So it's not like you can find out their information where they're living. A lot of the government websites and things like this, they're just not integrated like they are in the West. It's quite easy to find where someone lives or whatever, where I'm from, and probably in America as well. It's just not the case in Japan because of the privacy laws. So as for the privacy laws in Japan, think of it as sort of like the missing person laws that you have in America. So people have a right to sort of go missing. If people want to track you down, they'll normally like contact the police or something. The police will find you and they might say, well, such so-and-so is worried about you. Do you wish to speak to them? And they can say yes or no. So in that case, if they said no, they would just contact the person inquiring about him and say, well, the person is in good health and just doesn't want to speak to you. And that's their right under American law. And that's similar to the laws here with land and whatever. So you could request government agencies to track the owner down, and in many cases they can't. They don't know where they are, and if it's a foreigner who's overseas, the chances of being able to track them down are near zero. But it's quite common here that they can't find the owner as well, and a lot of places actually end up on these Akiya banks and things, and they actually don't even know who's going to get the money. It's just like John Doe owns it or something like that. They just can't find them. So you'll come across this a lot, and the best way to avoid this sort of thing is what I've been talking about, is knowing your area before you buy. We've got traffic lights out here. Knowing the area before you buy and things like this. So a person made a comment on a recent video of mine. I'm looking after a small block of land that's not owned by me. It's only tiny, and I know who the owner is, or who the owner was, and it was a local, like 2 decades ago, and they've moved somewhere, and nobody knows where they are now. So it's possible that I can track them down, ask some government agencies to forward a letter or something like that onto the owner, but it's totally up to their discretion what they do with that. They could just throw the letter in the bin, so I can ask them to please maintain that small block of land near my house or something like that. But the chances are they might just throw it in the bin. I mean, they know they own it, and they haven't done anything about it. So what normally happens in Japan is you wouldn't push this sort of matter, because especially in the case of myself, it's not really a big deal. It's just a small block of land. It doesn't take too much time to sort of keep on top of it, and you certainly wouldn't use the court system over such a silly matter, but people would, where I come from. They use the court system and litigation and get so many different people involved, and it just becomes a big kerfuffle, but that doesn't happen in Japan. So basically the sort of courtesy, at least in my area, is you maintain land that you own, that sort of infringes upon people's property. So next to their house, for example, you wouldn't leave that unmaintained. But a field out in the middle of nowhere that's not next to a house, that's not a big deal. People won't pull you up on that. Can you please do this? Or whatever. That's just not done. But if it was right next to somebody's house, they'd be knocking on your door as soon as it got above 4 feet. That's the sort of courtesy in my area. But if it's away from things, people understand, and many people have these blocks of land themselves that they don't use and they don't maintain, and it's not bothering anybody. So I've got about 3 fields that I don't maintain at all, which I'll get around to at some stage of tidying up, but they're not bothering anybody, so it's not a priority. And the third common one, and this might sound a bit strange, but people own land and they don't know where it is. Very common. I've talked about this before. I've got 19 titles of land when I bought my house, and 7 of them I do not even know where they are. And I've got the title deeds and things like this, and I've asked around, and the common consensus is that they're behind the monkey fence. So people who watch my videos have got the monkey fence that's been put up, and it's been there for years. And the common consensus with everybody is it's somewhere behind the monkey fence. So if you were to walk behind the monkey fence, there's lots of small roads, narrow roads that are quite common in rural areas that would have looked pristine back in the day when it was heavily populated, these areas, but everyone's moved on, population's gone down over time, and they've moved the monkey fence forward because nobody's farming there. So the amount of monkey fence needed would be much less. So it would be a lot cheaper to keep the monkeys out. So that's what's happened at some stage, is everybody sort of abandoned those higher blocks of land going up the mountain and stuff like that, and everybody owns land there, and that's never maintained. It's behind the monkey fence, but they still pay rates on it. So there is an owner, and if you were to walk there now, you wouldn't be able to find the roads, you wouldn't be able to find the block, and it would be an absolute struggle to find a block of land that's worthless. So people just don't bother. So I know I've said this many times, but it's very important when you make your purchase of a house in a rural area in Japan is that you make sure you know the place you're moving into, and that's going to be suitable for you long term, and that you have your plans and you don't make an impulse purchase off the internet. Know the area that you're moving into, that it suits you, and not make an impulse buy off a pretty picture on the internet. And this just happens so often, and it's always worth saying, because people who take this to heart, they will have a less chance of making a big mistake. And as I said, 80% of foreigners who do this out in rural areas, they see some pretty videos, and they have $20,000 that they say, well, I can't get a house for this money where I'm from, and they just end up with a $20,000 burden that they end up walking away from. This sort of reality in Japan, a lot of foreign YouTubers don't talk about it. How many of these Akiya YouTubers ever talk about having a gardener maintain their place while they go back home for their 6 months? Never happens, and it's usually because they don't do it. And down the track, you realise their channel has been inactive for a couple of years, and the reality of the situation is they're a bad owner, and it's because of how they went about it initially. And I've got a video out how not to buy an Akiya, and I put this out just so these sort of things don't happen. And you'll be surprised of the hate that you get from foreigners just for common sense advice. And a lot of the hate you get, they're from these people who've already done it. They've already gone and they've bought these impulse purchases, and it just never works out for them. And I'm only a small channel, and I can only do what I do. But if you haven't seen my How Not to Buy a Kia video, I'll link it in the description down below as well. And if you wish to support the Stray Cat Cafe project, there's a link to buy me a coffee or buy me a can of cat food. That's in the description as well. So anyway, as always, hope you like the video.
Let's go walk home.